My name is John Pennisi. I'm a former made member of the Lucchese crime family. This is how crime works. The biggest misconception about Cosa Nostra and the people that are involved in that life are people really believe that there is honor, loyalty, and respect. These three principles which Cosa Nostra is based on, it no longer exists. Honor, loyalty, and respect have been replaced by selfishness and greed. The rules for a member is the rules of the family and the rules of Cosa Nostra. And those particular rules are, you're not to put your hand on another made member. You're not to go with another made member's wife or even girl, for that matter. You would need to be fully blooded Italian. Your mother and your father need to be Italian. Your bloodline needs to be all Italian. But with every rule, there's an exception. And there has been people who slipped through the cracks, so to speak. One of the rules is you shouldn't get involved in lawsuits. You should not sue people. And I know that there was a rule where you're not to get involved in stocks and bonds. I'm not 100% sure if that's still in effect today. Specifically in New York, you were not to kill women and children of family members in the mob. They were not allowed to use explosive devices such as bombs, because on the other side, in Italy and Sicily, they were known to use explosives to take out members during a war or just to take a member out. They didn't want that kind of attention in New York. So there's an exception to every rule. Frankie DeCicco, who was the underboss for the Gambino family, had an explosive device put under his car and he was blown up as a result of that. The no drug dealing rule applies to all the five families, but all the five families have drug dealing activities going on in it. Every family is going to have certain members that are involved in the drug business and kind of turn a blind eye to it because it brings in so much money. Cosa Nostra members today have no problem breaking the rules on a daily basis, whereas in Carlo Gambino's era, you couldn't break the rules. Breaking the rules meant getting yourself killed. So all these rules that were put in place for reasons are now being broken. So when you have an organization that no longer follows its own rules, it weakens the organization. Before they created the five families, the head of each family was called like a father, so that's where they would get the name Godfather. And at some point, they broke it down to five fathers, and there was five families. So the five families in New York are the Genovese family, which in the street, they were known as the West Side. That's how we refer to them. There's the Gambino family, there's the Lucchese family, there's the Colombo family, and the Bonanno family. And they're like the nucleus of Cosa Nostra for the United States. So as far as the five families all being in New York, they controlled the entire state of New York. It wasn't only New York City. And then you have the creation of the commission, which was the idea basically of Meyer Lansky, who looked at it as a board of directors. The commission consisted of the head of each of the families, those five families, and they would basically make decisions on anything that went on between them. Territories were divided obviously by what family represented which part of New York City. It's kind of, they cut their own turf out, but if it overlapped, that's where a commission would come in and make a ruling. So when they created the structure of the five families, they set it up more like a military. From the bottom of that pecking order, you have the associates, who are considered civilians. Anybody that's not a made member of that life is considered a civilian. Above them are the made members of the family, which are called friends. We call them friends in that life. Above them are captains, as we say, caporegimes. They're the head of the crews. A family is represented by all the crews that are in that family. And then above them are the administration of the family. The top of the administration is the boss, the underboss, and the consigliere. And that's the structure of the whole family. The word Cosa Nostra means our thing. And that basically means that the structure of the mob, or as people would call it, mafia, belongs to them, the members of that life. The mob picks you. That life, Cosa Nostra, picks you. You don't pick that life. So before someone becomes an inducted member of a family, they become an associate. And usually how they become an associate is they're associated to someone who's already an inducted member. In order for an associate to be proposed, I think several factors take place. One is how good they get along with whoever it is that they're with, the soldier that they're with. You know, that they do what they're told to do. They keep their mouth closed. Once you're proposed, a ceremony takes place. Who's conducting that ceremony is going to be a member or members of the administration. Along with them is going to be obviously the captain that's going to propose you that day. A pistol and a knife are on the table during this ceremony, and it's mostly there for symbolic reasons. Your trigger finger, whether you're a righty or a lefty, is pricked. Your blood is dropped on a saint, a picture of a saint. It just symbolizes that the oath that you're taking and the oath that you're about to take, you're taking it holding that saint in your hand. And they ultimately light that saint on fire, and you're moving that saint from hand to hand. And you're repeating after whoever's conducting the ceremony. After which he is explaining the rules of that life to you. My position within the Lucchese family was as a soldier, but there was times that I acted for my captain in the capacity of an acting captain, specifically for a sit-down. The administration would pick the captains of the family. The requirement to be a captain obviously would be good leadership, so they would have to see something in that person to feel that he could lead the crew. That captain is responsible for each member of the crew, but he's also responsible for all the associates that are associated to that crew. A consigliere position is that of a counselor. So he is specifically handling not only internal, what we would call beefs or struggles inside of the family, but external as well. The difference between a boss and an underboss, there's not a whole big difference with the exception of the title. Obviously, the boss is the head of the family, but the underboss holds just as much weight in that family as the boss. Overall, a boss's position is to oversee the family. He's really in charge of everything that goes on underneath him, which goes through the administration, all his captains, all the soldiers in the family, all the way down to the associates. The way the life is structured, the boss is supposed to abide by the same rules that the captains, his administration, the soldiers, and everyone else in that life abide by. A boss of a family or a family together could bring in hundreds of millions of dollars per year. There's many reasons to fill a boss position. One obviously would be a boss is arrested, incarcerated. One would be a boss passes away through health reasons, and there is a void in the position. But then there's also reasons, like in the Paul Castellano situation, a boss that they felt was being greedy, and the family turned on the boss. There's different scenarios where a boss can be taken out, replaced, or ultimately killed, for that matter. I think years ago when it was first created, the five families, there was a lot more corruption with having law enforcement on the payroll than as it is today. I think there's less of that going on, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't go on. As far as political influence, obviously it would go through putting money in people's pockets for political favors. In present times, I don't think that they have the political power that they once had. I don't think they're able to corrupt the politicians as they were years ago. Initially, the mob took control of unions by force. They would put people in, those people would corrupt the union, take over the unions, and that's how they were able to control most of the unions, specifically in New York City. But today, they have their hand in it, in little areas, but they don't control the unions like they did in the past. Cosa Nostra came to be in New York sometime in the early 1900s. This was an organization and structure that came from the other side, which means Italy, Sicily. When the immigrants from those countries came here to this country, the Italians were almost like second-class citizens, and they were discriminated against when they came. So in the beginning, it was to fight oppression, but naturally that turned into committing organized crime and criminal acts to gain a profit from. So when the average citizen started to take notice of Cosa Nostra here, I believe that the first reactions were fear and intimidation. Because they feared and they were intimidated over this group of Italians, they were also fearful to go to law enforcement. They were fearful to talk out against them. In turn, Cosa Nostra gained its power because of this. So I joined Cosa Nostra because I came from a neighborhood, both Ozone Park and Howard Beach, which was replete with guys in that life. And I believed that I looked up to them at that time and wanted to be just like them. If you're around people that are in that life, inducted members, at some point, you become an associate. And we were associated, my cousin and I, to the Gambino family through John Gotti Jr. And the time I'm talking about, I was around 14, 15 years old at that time. So sometime around 2012, I became an associate and on record with the Lucchese crime family. By 2013, I was an inducted member in the family. I stayed an inducted member in the family until 2018. I ultimately winded up leaving the life because the family that I was a member of falsely accused me of being an informant when it wasn't true. They now were laying on me, which meant that they sent people to lay and get my pattern. Usually when that is done, it's either to A, hurt you, or B, kill you. I made my decision that I would never go back to my former friends who turned on me. So obviously my life has took a dramatic change. I'm no longer able to see my family as much as I like to. I'm not able to live as close to them as I would like to. I have to watch every place I go, and be very careful at what I do. And my plans have to be mapped out of where I'm going and what I'm doing. So my life took a big change. In my opinion, in 20 years from now, Cosa Nostra is hardly going to exist in New York. I don't believe that they're going to be able to survive. Cosa Nostra now, compared to years ago, has definitely declined. And the reason is the sentences that are being handed out. The government, and specifically the FBI, have unlimited funds. They're able to go after them. They're able to take out bosses with the RICO. As far as earning money by committing crimes or doing various criminal acts, it's limited today than it was. So now once you limit money making and money earning, you're taking away power, because money brings power, and the organized crime today is definitely less powerful than it was in years past. In the past few years, there's been an increase in arrests and a large number of arrests in Cosa Nostra. Specific families are targeted. And the reason being is that it's hard for members of Cosa Nostra to operate without law enforcement, specifically the FBI, knowing what they're doing. There are more people that are informants, cooperators. They have people that are working inside families with the FBI, giving the FBI information. That's how they're dismantling families, family by family. They dismantle them. Members of law enforcement from the United States now work very closely with members of law enforcement from people outside of the United States, like Italy and Sicily. They jointly create cases together. I made the decision to create a blog, and I started just writing from my experiences. So the first podcast I created is also the name of the blog, which is called Sit Down News, and that's also the name of the podcast. And I just recently created a second podcast called Unlimited Substance.
My name's Cain Vincent Dyer, and I robbed over 100 banks between 1999 and 2001. This is how crime works. For anyone out there that is watching this and you think you're gonna go commit bank robberies the way I did, or I'm telling you in here, you're gonna find yourself in jail. Leave bank robbery alone. So one of the things that I would do initially when I walk into a bank is walk in and go straight to the merchant teller, because I always knew that the merchant teller would more than likely have the most amount of currency. We've watched so many movies where people are like, hey, put your hands in the air. I think people naturally go to do that when they hear, hey, this is a robbery. The reasoning for me asking them to put their hands down or telling them to put their hands down is because you didn't want someone walking past the bank and seeing someone standing in a bank with their hands up or laying on the floor. So it was always just put your head down, keep looking forward. That way, if someone did walk into the bank, they wouldn't even really realize what was going on until they were already in it. And what that would kind of do is it would let me read the temperature of the room. It would let me see if the people were either very compliant or very slow to move, or if they seemed nervous and scared, then I would kind of tailor how I would express myself after that, trying to be more calming. And, unfortunately, if, things were moving kind of slower, I would probably be a little bit more aggressive to the overall crowd. Checking the temperature, doing that one teller, I knew that one merchant teller, I knew if I decided not to go in the vault, that I would still have a reasonable, outcome for the payday. That merchant teller, along with the manager, is the person I would have walk me into a vault. And like I said, if they were just a little too afraid or anything, then there are times where, I wouldn't go into the vault. Typically, I picked banks that were close to merchants. That way, I knew that that bank would more than likely be the banker for all those merchants that were there. And that would mean that that bank would more than likely have more cash on hand. The other thing was it always had to be a bank that was relatively close to multiple interstates. And one of the other things was how the bank was set up. Were there multiple ways that I could enter or exit? Like casing a bank would consist of me watching the employees. And I would always watch to see who looked like they were in the most control. So sometimes I'd case a bank for a day and a half, and then go, if it was a bigger bank. and I would watch the flow. I'd watch the timing of the flow. I'd watch the pickup. I took probably, I don't know, a few weeks, a month off, and just taught myself everything about banks. At that time, got in a hold of all different types of bank manuals, employee manuals, employee guides, everything, safes, lock safes, time vaults. During my bank robberies, as far as attire would go, I would just always try and fit in whatever element was present. It was always pretty much just dressing down, jeans, a jacket, trying not to stand out too much. I definitely used the crazy glue to protect my fingertips and my palms. I would always wear a pair of glasses, always a baseball cap, and that seemed to cover enough. The mascara would be basically, it depended where I was. If I was in a place where there are more ethnic people, I would typically do a beard. If I was in a place where there were less ethnic people, I would more so sometimes going clean shaven or a really light shave. I would actually look at weather conditions because, of course, in an area where it's going to be raining or overcast, you can layer more. If it was sunny outside, there are a lot more people out. So there's probably more chances for me even to blend in. On a rainy day, though you get to bundle up, you still get to know that there aren't a lot of people out. So people are going to probably be looking at you. In certain cities, you had to account for different times that I would be going into a bank, not getting stuck in a rush hour traffic. Though there were banks that I absolutely would do it rush hour just because it would take longer for law enforcement to get to me if there was a lot of traffic out. So we've seen in movies that cops have this response time of about 3 to 5 minutes. And that's pretty accurate. That is not just Hollywood. So I would park across the street or in some direction where I wasn't alone, standing out by myself. My car wasn't the only one. And I always used a car that would fit in. Something that was really typical, that you would just see a lot of. What I would always try and do is make sure that wherever I was parked, that it would not be in view of anyone that would be standing in a bank or immediately outside of a bank. So I always gave myself enough space to get away and then kind of disappear. So when exiting a bank, once I felt I was out of sight, I would turn a corner or something, then I would trot a little bit further once I wasn't in front of a bank trotting. As soon as I'm in my car and my mascara is off, I turn on my radio, roll down my windows, take off my hat, and I'm singing. I've got music on. Cops pass me. I'm looking at them. They're looking at me because what they're actually looking for is the guy that's not looking at them. Listen, when a bunch of cops roll past you, or even fire trucks, what do? We all look. So the one guy they're looking for is the guy who won't look at them. As they're driving to it, they're looking to see if anybody's trying to ignore them personally, typically. How I would end up checking for die packs was different depending on what type of money I took. If it was just the merchant teller, then of course that money is loose. Even though it's in stacks, it's still loose. So what I would do is once I got all my mascara and things off and I was set and ready to drive, I would literally put a bag of money next to me and go through it and then throw that money kind of like on the floor. I would get back to my stakeout and I would go through all the money, taking my clothes, making sure they were burned, putting my fingers in solution so I could get the crazy glue off. I would hide the money in several different places, but to be a little bit more specific, there was this one place that I had opened up the floor of it. I don't know, at one point there had to just millions of dollars in this floor. There were a couple of times I actually put money in like a bank vault, in like a safety deposit box. Wouldn't that have been ironic had there been a bank robbery and it gotten stolen, huh? The way I ended up getting into bank robbery, a very, very close person to me, a relative, a sibling, had gotten involved with a criminal organization. There was just no way he was going to get around this debt. It would have been a matter of life or death. Had this debt not been paid, taken care of, the person would have lost their life. Those first set of banks that paid off that debt, those 6, though, were a lot less preparation and more desperation. Initially, I felt bank robbery was this victimless crime. I thought it would just be a better crime to commit. I felt like I was taking from an institution versus a person, which I wouldn't have done. My first bank, I was literally just looking for any bank. I was going down the freeway and actually had to use the restroom. So I pulled off the freeway. It was at this Calabasas exit. I pulled in there to go to the restroom. I ended up parking, and right in front of me were 2 banks. There was a Chase and there was a Wells Fargo. And I sat there for a time period trying to determine which one I should go in, just watching the flow of people. I had this baseball cap and stuff, and I kind of pumped myself up. Had this firearm with me, and I'm heading towards the bank. And as I get towards the bank, 2 things happen. One, there was this lady who was at the bank that seemed pregnant to me. And it was just like, I can't go in there while a pregnant lady's in there. She gets scared and, the baby's harmed. So I was like, I kind of turned back. And as I went to turn back, there was this car window right there. And I look in the car window and I notice, oh my God, I can totally see myself. Like, I can make myself out. So I went to this store that was miles down the road. I ended up getting this backpack. And I also got some mascara and some crazy glue to put on my fingertips as not to leave any fingerprints, because I didn't want to walk up to the bank with gloves on, which is, to me, pretty obvious. It was a sunny afternoon. There was that cord while I was at this store that just kind of struck me like, what if someone tries to stop me? It made me purchase a replica, like an air gun or something like that, but it looked very, very authentic. So I purchased that and decided to use that in the robbery instead. Realizing that I probably needed a bigger bag, so I ended up grabbing this backpack. I realized that the backpack had these double zippers that I could partially open that would make it like a perfect sack that would be able to put things in, still have another hand free. Hence the name Kangaroo Bandit. When my consciousness started to awaken again, I think I could no longer hide behind the life and death, imminent danger that was there before. I know if I would have kept doing it, I would have got caught. When I decided to turn myself in, of course I let my family know first, and then my attorney and we contacted the FBI. And at first they were like, yeah, oh, absolutely, absolutely. What I did not know at that time was someone had already kind of given them my name. I contacted them on a Wednesday and had planned on meeting them on a Friday. And instead they were like, no, we're not waiting on you to come in. They did this huge raid on my home on a Thursday night. But the only way they were able to take me in is if they found something on that search warrant, which they weren't able to find. Before he left, though, he and I had this conversation, he being the FBI agent. So I told him, I'm going to take some time to go spend with my family. And then when I'm ready, I'm going to turn myself in. And I was letting him know, don't worry, I'm not going to run. I'm not going to bolt, man. I'm going to keep my word. I told you I'd keep my word and turn myself in. And I ended up doing that. So when he saw me and I saw him after I had greeted my family, I actually walked up to him and we kind of embraced. We actually hugged each other. I surrendered. It was like, okay, now I begin my life. Well, I did not understand back in that time the psychological tolls that the victim suffered, the heavy cost I was having others pay to get out of the situation I was in. And so what I've done in an attempt to rectify that or to make right, I've worked with victims. I've worked with ex-offenders, and hopefully any victim that suffered at my hands and because of my actions, maybe they can take some comfort in knowing that today I actually, I've tried to wrong that. I didn't try. I like to think I am righting those wrongs. Volunteered for years. For almost 4 years straight, I volunteered 4 days a week, 4 hours a day to help people get their lives back, whether it's an inmate or a former inmate or a victim.
My name is Jay Dobyns. I'm a retired undercover federal agent, and I infiltrated the Hells Angels. This is how crime works. With all the hatred from me in that gang and from their supporters, they can take some satisfaction of that. They ran right over the top of me. All that battle damage, all those things happened, the failed prosecution, all that blood, sweat, and tears, they ran right over the top of me and kept going. I was just a speed bump. I was part of the Hells Angels investigation, which we named Operation Black Biscuit, from 2001 to 2003. I answered to a case agent. We were both ATF agents. My false persona, I went by the name of Jay Dobyns. The gang members knew me as Jaybird, and I portrayed myself to be a gun runner, a debt collector. The Hells Angels don't have to actively recruit members. They want people that bring them value. I had spent some time as an associate of the Hells Angel, so getting to know them, getting to let them get familiar with me, and I was invited to the clubhouse. And the invitation, it wasn't so much an invitation as it was an order. They believed that I was doing debt collections and that I was running guns within their territory. So I was told that if I intended to keep doing that business, I had to come to their clubhouse and meet their members and basically have them sanction me to continue. I showed up at the Mesa clubhouse and was greeted in the street by 4 or 5 Hells Angels. Some had guns, some had baseball bats. In Arizona, you can open carry firearms. And so I had guns that were exposed on me. Some of the members who were basically working as security told me, you can't bring your guns inside our clubhouse. That's not allowed. And I told them, I'm not taking my guns off. And I don't take them off for anybody, including the Hells Angels. You have people that you feel like you need to defend yourself against, so do I. If I allowed them to start dictating everything to me, it was never going to end. And at that point, one of the shot callers from the Hells Angels came out and put his arm over my shoulder and he said, look, I make the rules and you can come in with your guns on. So right off the bat, from that very first critical interaction, I felt like I was winning. The Hells Angels call themselves a club, the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. There's charters, and within the charter, the chapter, the group, there's a president, a vice president, a warlord, which is in charge of weapons and retaliations and defense. When I was associated with the Mesa Hells Angels, which is where I started, their president was Bad Bob Johnston. And he was a very well-respected, feared, longtime Hells Angel. If I could gain his trust, that his trust would be projected to other members and would open doors for me. In the biker gang, you start off very slowly. The first step is that you're an associate, which is you're just someone who's spending some time in the presence of the gang members. Once you build a relationship, the gang will ask you to hang around. Then after you prospect, ultimately, hopefully, you're doing that to become a full patch member. From the date of your prospecting, from when it starts, there's a minimum mandatory of 365 days. And that's to some extent how they insulate themselves, because they know that a cop can't keep pace with them and can't keep up with them for that long of time. To be a full patched Hells Angel, it is everything to those members. The patches that they wear and the formatting of their vests, which are also called cuts, is very important in this hierarchy. I was a hang-around for the Skull Valley, Arizona charter of the Hells Angels. So I had a black cut that had nothing but Skull Valley on the front. When you become a prospect, you get your bottom rocker, the bottom curved patch. So when I was prospecting, I got an Arizona bottom rocker. When you become a member, then you get your top rocker, the designator Hells Angels or whatever the gang is, and your center patch, which the Hells Angels is the death head. To get full membership, you have to be voted on by the members of your charter, and you have to receive a 100% vote. If one member of that charter votes against you, your prospecting phase continues. There's another rule in the land of prospects, is that it takes as long as it takes. Territory is very important to the biker gangs. The territory you control influences how much money you can make within that territory. They're constantly trying to acquire territories of competitive gangs. The rivalry that I became most aware of or closest to was the Hells Angels rivalry with the Mongols motorcycle gang. The Mongols were a California-based biker gang. I was at the 2002 Laughlin River Run, which was a major biker run in Laughlin, Nevada. The Mongols' home base was Harrah's Casino, which was a short drive up the main Laughlin Drag, Casino Drive, to where the Hells Angels home base was, which was the Flamingo Hotel. Some Hells Angels went down to Harrah's and started poking the tiger and got surrounded, and it was on. And it was every man for himself. I stepped outside of the Flamingo, and police cruisers and police motorcycles and cars and police helicopters were all screaming down Casino Drive. And I was with another agent, and I turned to him and I said, well, I guess we know where the Hells Angels went, because the police response was massive. The Harrah's Casino riot, the Morongo Casino riot, the Twin Peaks shooting in Texas. Those biker clashes are taking place all the time. We typically don't see it or hear about it until it takes place in a public venue where civilians, where just common man citizens are involved in it. There were fights that I was present for, that I knew the rules. I didn't want to blow my cover, but at the same time, I didn't want to watch some innocent civilian get beat down. I would find the target of the beating and throw some legitimate punches on them. Like I wasn't faking throwing good, hard, solid punches on the victim of this rat packing. But in essence, what I was doing was protecting that victim's head. I wasn't going to kill anybody punching them in the head, but they would have gotten killed if they take a steel-toed boot in the forehead. I got a call from a Skull Valley charter officer. Get to the clubhouse right now and bring all your hardware, which meant bring your guns. I was told the Bandidos are coming to Las Vegas. Las Vegas is our territory, and they have not requested a hall pass. We expect you to shoot them before they get the kickstands down on their motorcycle. And here's the kicker. We're going to be watching you from a distance. If you don't shoot them, we are going to shoot you. I was able to get in touch with the case agent, Joe Slatella, and tell him what my orders were. Joe Slatella found this pack of Bandidos, pulled them to the side of the road, and stopped them. So I showed up at the target location with the Hells Angels watching me, but the Bandidos never showed up. In the eyes of the Hells Angels, all they knew is we sent Jaybird to Las Vegas to kill Bandidos, and dang it, he was there, ready to handle his business. I allowed the Hells Angels to see me in criminal situations in order to hopefully avoid some of those mud checks that I knew were coming. In biker land, a mud check is a test to see if you're gonna your pants when you're confronted with a treacherous situation. So they would accurately see me in a narcotics transaction. I would either receive or give narcotics and either receive or give money in exchange, all while being witnessed by a Hells Angels like enforcer, bodyguard. What they didn't realize is that the person that I was in the transaction with was another law enforcement officer who was playing the role of a drug dealer. The local police departments, the local officers, they weren't in on the scheme. I got stopped by the cops all the time. I got beaten up by the cops. I was never as good of a motorcycle rider as the Hells Angels were. They could perform tricks, do all kinds of crazy stunts that I couldn't do. And riding in a pack of Hells Angels, it takes an enormous amount of focus. You have to trust the person riding next to you because they're so close. Like one person makes a mistake in that conga line of motorcycles and everybody's going down. I was told, when you meet a Hells Angel and you got your sunglasses on, you better lift your sunglasses up and look that person in the eye. That member wants to see your eyes. I was told if I had riding gloves on, you better take your riding glove off when you shake hands with a Hells Angel. Never touch a Hells Angels patch. Never slap them on the back. I made those mistakes and was reprimanded for it, was smacked for it on occasion. With regards to women, there's a hierarchy that takes place within the gang. There's old ladies who are the wives or girlfriends of members, and they're off limits. You better not get caught trying to mess around with a member's wife or girlfriend because there's a violent price to pay. But there's also women who, they move from member to member to member. Members can leave the gang of their own free will in good standing. Like in essence, they can retire. And when they retire, they're considered out good. They still have to relinquish all their Hells Angels property. But if you're out bad, they will come and take back their cut, their vest. They will take back your motorcycle. That's their property in their eyes. And they'll take back that tattoo. I was a part and a piece of the process of those reclamations of Hells Angels property. Like basically almost like the police doing a search warrant, breaking into a guy's house and taking every single thing that said or looked like it belonged to the Hells Angels. The Hells Angels operate independently in their charters as far as how they make money and how they conduct their business. So there's charters that run a fairly clean business and that aren't involved in a lot of crime. There's others that are involved in narcotics trafficking, gun running, extortions, protection rackets. There's no payday or no salary to be drawn by being a member of the Hells Angels. There's no big universal bank account that issues paychecks. There was Hells Angels members that I ran across that were selling street drugs. and putting those profits in their pocket and keeping at least the bulk of that profit for themselves. And then they have legitimate businesses that they can push money through. Just the swag and paraphernalia of the Hells Angels is a multi-million-dollar business. The Hells Angels hold toy runs, and they conduct blood drives, and they do community service. And that shouldn't be taken away from them. They make positive contributions to society with those things. Hells Angels parties could be as spontaneous as the drop of a hat. You could be at the clubhouse, and the next thing you know, music's blaring, and guests are arriving, and women are coming in, and the booze is flowing. They could be inside, outside. They happened at parks, campsites. There's a myth that every Hells Angel is a drug addict. There was Hells Angels that were fitness freaks, that took care of themselves. They ate well. They got their rest. They didn't drink. They didn't smoke. So to decline those things wasn't necessarily a false alarm, a red flag against you. I have a tattoo of St. Michael on my arm. And St. Michael is the patron saint of law enforcement. It signifies good triumphing over evil. There was times when I got pressed where I would show my St. Michael tattoo and say, do you understand what this is? I got this when I graduated from rehab. The reason why I'm here, the reason why you are interacting with me is because I'm sober, because I have money in my pocket, all those things that are attractive to you. As the infiltration investigation that I was working on started winding down, we had 2 years under our belts, lots of money, like well over $1 million invested in this investigation. And I still had not received membership. I still hadn't gotten my full patch. I was a prospect. To be quite honest, selfishly, I was trying to accelerate the process. So I went back to one of those very early statements that was made to me. What happens if I cross paths with a Mongol? I was told, it's your responsibility to kill him. So I went to the Skull Valley Hells Angels leadership and I told them, I've got a line on a Mongol in Mexico. We found this Mongol. I dug a shallow grave in the desert, took some Polaroid pictures of the murder. What they didn't know is that it was the ultimate scam. The murdered Mongol was a member of our task force that we had dressed up, concealed his face in the pictures, and then we'd used blood and guts from the butcher shop to create a murder scene, a crime scene. They made me a member there of the Skull Valley Charter, gave me a cut to wear. Now, after the fact, they have denied a couple things. They denied that they believed it. Okay, I understand that. They denied that I ever became a member. Both sides of that explanation are actually true. I was made a member of the Skull Valley Charter. I was given a cut and told that I was a Hells Angel and that I was a member of Skull Valley. But I was also told, because I was within the 1-year prospect probation period, that an international vote would have to be taken to accelerate my membership, which never took place. Our case ended before the Hells Angels took that vote. So they're correct in that too. I've never tried to hedge that. I've never tried to dance around that or deny that. So the operation concluded for a couple reasons. We had a vast amount of evidence against our suspects, physical evidence, thousands of hours of tape-recorded conversation, criminal conversations. In the end, we indicted 55 Hells Angels and associates, and 16 of those were indicted on racketeering charges, RICO charges. Some charges were dismissed, some charges were reduced. In that discovery open source process, the Hells Angels learned that the person they thought to be Jay Davis, the debt collector, the gun runner, the contract killer, Jaybird, was actually Jay Dobyns, an ATF agent. And the threats against me and my family started stacking up. The Hells Angels held murder contracts on me. They were farmed to the Aryan Brotherhood. They were farmed to the MS-13 through the prison system. So all these people had their fingers on a murder contract for me. My family was in jeopardy. And in the summer of 2008, my house was burned to the ground. In the process of this Hells Angels case, I abandoned and betrayed my family. I made this investigation my priority. My wife and my kids weren't. I was trying to be a great undercover agent, and in the process, I betrayed my own family. That's one of the things, is that in this undercover role, I built real human relationships. Not every second was spent in the middle of some criminal activity or doing something violent or treacherous or illegal. I spent time with members riding, casually riding, not violently or threatening riding, shooting pool, hanging out. Members slept at my house. I slept at members' house. There's human relationships that are built, and you can never undercover out the human factor. There's people you like, there's people you don't like. It's no different than any other aspect of society. I wrote a book. It's titled No Angel, My Harrowing Undercover Journey to the Inner Circle of the Hells Angels. Then after I did that, and after I followed ATF's instructions to defend myself, they ultimately sued me for the book. I coached high school football at the end of my career and into my retirement, which I got a lot of satisfaction from. Like that service before self, trying to influence the lives of young men and teach them some football along the way.
My name is Omar Sharif. I was formerly involved in gang activity in London, and this is how crime works. I was involved in gangs from 2005 until 2011. I'm grateful that I'm still alive, although I've come very close to losing my life inside of gangs. I've had a bunch of knives put to my neck, stomach. I've been stabbed twice in my right leg. I've had guns put to me. The structure of a gang is almost like being in employment. Okay, you have the newbies that come involved, you then have management, you then have senior management. I got involved in a gang when I was around 13 years old, actually from selling sweets in school. I was approached one day by someone who said, how would you like to make more money? And initially I knew what he was talking about. I was scared, but when he started mentioning things about, you can be a man, you can provide for help your parents at home. And when you come from a council flat estate and, sometimes things are not easy, that kind of languaging is enough to make you say, well, okay, can I actually do this? When you join at the age that I did, you're considered a younger. A younger is the street soldier. A younger is the person who just gets employed into the gang. As part of the gang initially, as a younger, were to hold certain things, were to make deliveries, were to be on call. You're told where to go, what to do, not to look into bags, not to look into boxes. It's just, you're a yes man. And we look up to our elders. So our elders are the people that we aspire to be. The ones that have the money, at the time they had the Gucci belts, the Rolexes, the gold teeth, the nice cars. In a gang, the older is not always in charge, but he is almost like middle management. So he takes control of what gets moved in and out of the area, who's selling what on certain streets, money management, distribution, and he or she, it can be a she as well, they'll have the connections to the people at the top. So it's kind of like a chain of command. So they're the ones who normally even groom people into a gang. They're the ones who, when things go a bit sour and people get, hit on, beaten up, sometimes kidnapped, sometimes threatened, it's the elders that they call. But I know from experience that even the elders who we looked up to, they are speaking to people above them. I've seen people who are above the elders who look nothing like us, who don't sound like us at all. I can guess the jobs that they do, and they are very embedded into society. which was quite an eye-opener for me because I thought even as a young black guy in London, it's only guys like me that do this kind of stuff. But actually, we're just their foot soldiers. So even our elders who we wanted to become, they're still the S-man for someone else. The people who are above our elders in the gang, the highest on the hierarchy, from what I understood, this couple, they were massive on the real estate scene in the UK. They were not involved in themselves in the dirty work, but a lot of the money that went going into their businesses came from the money that a lot of the foot soldiers, the youngers like myself, will be making and passing up the food chain. It's scary to think that when you go to a bank or you're speaking to a lawyer or you're walking into Greater London and you're talking to someone that's quite high up in business, for example, they have interesting habits on the side or hobbies on the side because I've seen it with my own eyes. The way that street gangs make their money here in London, there are things like kidnappings, there are hits where someone wants someone to be hurt or killed. But the most common way, which I'd say is what you hear of or see most of day to day, is by selling drugs. Gangs normally have things called trap houses or bandos. Trap houses are places where drugs will be sold from, where they could be stored, weapons. Gang members will be living there or looking after the place, for example. And these are acquired in a number of ways. So these could be places where squatters have been for a while. It could be someone else's home that belongs to the gang. And these are safe spots for the gang. So if anything happens, you'll get a call saying, right, meet us at the trap house. We know where that is. The address is never texted over a phone. It's never spoken over a phone. It's always told, verbally, so there's no trace as to where it could be. And if they're in the area the gang belongs to, the police immediately will make a connection. Gang wars can start over the smallest things or the biggest things. Smallest things could be they were at a club or a rave, and from there someone gets stabbed, and then it's a whole, we need to retaliate, we need to send a message, we need to show them who we are. So they round up everyone, and then it's now not just one person versus one person, it's actually a gang versus gang, postcode versus postcode, and now we're talking 50 to 100 people plus. It got to a point where we were having postcode wars, meaning it was my block, NW1 versus NW5. These gang wars started because people started to become greedy. People were looking for power, people were looking for just to be significant, and also people wanted to rise up. Postcode wars are also named interstate wars. This is something that started even in the 60s, 70s, which areas became smaller or bigger, and it's a way of protecting territory. Now there are things called block wars, estate wars, which are even within the same postcode. There is such rivalry, there is such demand for who is more important. So it goes from area, postcode, now to blocks, which creates further division. Years ago, it seemed to be more of a reason as to why they're going to war, because something big happened. Even recently, I was mentoring about 10 young boys from a school, and one of them said to another one something offensive about his mum. That spilled out from school, and because it was filmed and put on social media, one of them actually ended up getting stabbed. There was a video of around, to me, looked like 60 people having a fight. I could see weapons, I saw machetes coming out. What are they fighting over? Essentially, it's nothing, really. Those fights are not happening over drugs, not happening over a threat from someone outside. It's just two male egos that can't have a conversation, and it has to result in violence, and then sometimes even death. Although guns are easy to source, knives are still the bigger problem. We hear more deaths happening from knives than gunshots, for sure. Maybe because the laws around knives aren't that regulated, because they say if you carry a knife you go to prison for 4 years, but then I hear people getting 3, 4, 5 warnings. So people aren't really taking the law seriously. And nowadays, when you hear about someone being stabbed, it's a younger against a younger. Olders don't get involved with stuff like that. And these youngers are not going to be able to get a hold of a gun unless they steal it from someone or steal it from the trap house, for example. For any under 18-year-old to get a knife, it's as easy as going onto Amazon and clicking something for next day delivery, and it gets delivered. It's not regulated. I know even on Snapchat, there are accounts on Snapchat every day where they say, hey, we have 5 machetes, we have 5 army knives with knuckle dusters attached to it. Who wants this? I've seen axes with chains. Why are they making these things? Why are they not asking for proof of ID. Some websites might say you must be over 18 to buy this. That has never deterred anyone under 18 to say, okay, ooh, I shouldn't do this. They don't know that by making that sale and then delivering it to that house, that young person goes and kills someone here. They're part of that cycle, but they're so far attached from that. In the UK, there is a law around carrying a knife, around the size of the blade itself being less than 3 inches. It has to be foldable, and you shouldn't be carrying it for the wrong reasons. I've been stopped and searched before, and sometimes I did have a knife on me, but I did have a foldable knife, and I wasn't in a state of anger. So the guy said to me, actually, if he caught me and I was in a state of anger, then he would have arrested me. And that made me realize, actually, they don't have a correct way of policing this, because I knew so many guys who would carry bigger blades than that, ones that you can't fold. And they'd be walking with those on high streets, for example. I've never heard of someone going to prison for carrying a knife. So I grew up in Marylebone, which essentially is a very, very nice area. However, there is a division, because there's one side of Marylebone where you have very nice mansions and nice flats with nice cars. That's not where I lived. I lived on the other side. I lived on the other side where it's council flats, it's block towers. Even though it's on our doorstep, we're brought up with a mindset and a belief system that we're not good enough for that. It's easy for anyone to be interested in joining a gang for many reasons. For young people, normally it's to do with money. The other main reason is that belonging. It's having a family, having that brotherhood, a sisterhood. We don't go to private schools, right? We go to just public schools, and that's where it all starts. I didn't run to a gang and say, hey, I want to be in your gang to make money. I tried to go down the proper route. You know, I borrowed some clothes to go to interviews. I applied for 50 jobs when I left school, and no one said yes to me. If society is not allowing me to make money in this way, but there's a lifestyle which could, where do I go? The first thing they do is befriend you, is they welcome you in, so they make you feel a part of a family. The second thing is to spoil you somehow. You know, if they know you need money, they give you some money. If they know you're hungry, you get some food. Then they test you somehow. They may ask you to hold something for them. They may ask you to be somewhere at a certain time. And normally they've set something up to get you robbed on purpose. They set you up in some way to see what you say, because that's them checking in on, ooh, can we trust this person? It's really bad the way they make you trust them and actually love them as a family, but you're just a pawn in a bigger game. In a gang, it's almost like putting together a fantasy football team. Different strengths. Someone could be fast, someone could be a good driver, someone could be a good fighter, someone could stab and not care about it, someone could steal. So when they recruit for a gang, I would say there are qualities that they look for. The number one thing they look for is loyalty, but they also look at how can they strengthen the gang? What can that person bring to the table? New gang members are recruited on a geographical basis. So the local recruitment is, I think, the priority for a gang, because they need to have numbers high. They need to have a certain amount of people on road doing certain things, a certain amount of people moving, distributing, managing. So in the UK, we have something called county lines. This is where a lot of the inner city gangs, there's no more territory. Everything's been divided up. So they're now thinking, right, how can we expand? So county lines are where these gangs want to operate in smaller towns, smaller cities, rural areas, and they normally use young people for this. So you may have heard of a term going OT, which is going out of town, and they're facilitated by the elders. So the elders would have someone in place who may live in a smaller town. They may have someone who has a farmhouse somewhere, train tickets, everything is paid for the young person. They're given a budget, they're given money for lunch and things like that. They'll tell them to dress how they dress. Normally, they'll give them a backpack, say, look, don't open a backpack, here's the address, go here, wait here, or call this number, for example. The whole point of doing that is so that police will say, well, it's a young person, we don't have to search them. I think in some way the UK is influenced by the US, not just on the rap scene. I know the drill scene came out, but also there's always a bit of competition. For example, the USA, the Bloods versus Crips, that also came here in the UK, and that was a massive scene for a while. There was a period where it just became colours. So there was just the bandana, which represented which color, which gang you're from. That's really why we started to see, music videos become more grimy. We started to see more killings. We started to see more weapons on the street. So in the US, we have gangs like BMF and GD who've been going on for 30 years plus, Latin Kings. I feel that in the UK, gangs are more divided. Here in the UK, you can have an estate, a block, and even within that block, it's divided, blocked, from block to block, street to street. That's what I experienced, and nowadays, I'm sure it's even worse. So the main difference for me is the size of the operation, but also it seems that they have more stability and more structure in the way that it creates longevity. I believe social media plays a massive role in the rise of gang violence because of the exposure that they get. I've interviewed a young person in prison, and he said the reason why he killed the people he's killed is because of songs that he'd listened to. He said he wanted to recreate that in real life. And I'm focused on young people because they're the vulnerable ones. They're the ones who aren't able to make a decision for themselves yet. I know for sure that there's going to be some collateral damage from these things, because when you listen clearly, if you can understand what they're saying in these drill songs, it's scary. What's allowed to be sold and listened to publicly and shared on radios, for example, because young people will listen to that and they want to replicate that because they think, okay, he is now my role model, my idol. For me to be deemed as someone successful, I need to do what he's doing. For children to avoid being targeted for gangs, it comes down to discipline for me. It's really understanding what you're getting yourself into. I think the way gangs are policed nowadays, it's difficult because it made me feel so embarrassed, to be stopped and searched in front of my mum, and she cried at home saying, why do they think my son is this kind of person? And I hated seeing her upset. But if I put their hat on, I think, right, well, if we stop and search everyone that looks like the criteria or stereotype, we could find another weapon and take it off the streets. For me, that's the wrong approach because not everyone who looks a certain way belongs in that stereotype. I think stop and search should be reviewed as a policy because if you find one young person and he's carrying a knife that's under 3 inches long that is foldable, they'll take it away, slap on the wrist, have a good day. Next day, he'll go find exactly the same knife from somewhere else, carry it again. Instead of creating or deepening that hate, you should try and create a relationship by doing things like going into schools. I've always said that you need to speak their language. If you want to police them, sit down and talk to them. A brother of a friend of mine, a while back, he was caught on the streets. He didn't have a lot of drugs on him, but he had enough, and he was arrested and went to prison for a short while. If someone said to him, hey, listen, we know what you're doing out here. How about we offer you an opportunity to earn money with us, or we'll find you a job? And you've got to think of it like this. Prison is a business. Every single person that gets put into prison, someone's getting paid. It's a good deterrent for some people because some people might take that as a lesson, saying, well, I know a friend of mine was carrying something and got arrested. I shouldn't do it too. But for the most people, it's not enough. In prison, there's more going on there than on the streets. And this is what we don't hear about on the news. There's people dying in prisons. The gangs are still doing the same thing in prison. I believe wealth inequality definitely contributes towards gang activity, gang violence. The way these gangs make their money, and also from personal experience, is through drugs, predominantly. If 90% of the money comes from drugs and you make it legalized, one thing can happen, that there's going to be too much demand for it. So either the gangs will start fighting even more because now they've got an open market, for example, or it could destabilize them because the second that companies here, pharmaceutical companies, will start getting involved and they're massive players. That will completely eliminate the gangs. So will they have money to buy weapons? Will they have money to even fund gang wars anymore? It probably wouldn't happen. For many young people who carry knives, one of the reasons, and one of my initial reasons, was because we feel unsafe, or we've heard about people being stabbed and we want to be able to protect ourselves. I don't think there's a quick fix to trying to make a young person feel safe. The way to solve the issue and deter them from it isn't by fear, because that doesn't work. It's by re-educating them on the consequences of these things. And I say giving people an opportunity, showing people more love. These people that are involved in gangs, they did everything they did because they wanted to feel love from people. They didn't get love from home. They didn't get that affection at home. But when they did something, the gang showed them a respect, and that's what drew them in even deeper. One thing I know that's changed over the years, and that would still help other people feel safe in gang-led areas, is the presence of youth centres. And these were places where you could have rival gangs come to the same building, make music together, play pool together, play basketball together, and it was a place of safety. When you have something that you're passionate about and have something that you care about, it removes the amount of time you spend with the gang. It removes the amount of time you spend on the streets. Schools do have a big part to play in gang culture, and it works both ways, because I've seen how if you have a school that's in the middle of 3 areas that are having a war, for example, then you have a big issue, because then you have, just like in prison, you have gang activity happening at school. It will take a community approach to remove or reduce, gang violence and gang activity. But I think it has to be a complete united front from all levels of society. If I had to look at London gangs 10 years from now, I can see the problem becoming deeper. I can see a culture which is being even more embedded into society. I think London gang culture will become almost like a standard for other gangs and other countries. There are young people who don't look at the seriousness of this. They will see it as it's cool. They will see it as it's a thing to be, just like I did when I was young. So yeah, 10 years from now is a scary place, especially as a parent. Trying to get out of a gang is one of the hardest things you can do. I didn't have a choice. It got to a point where I had to go out of the ends. So leaving the area where I was from, I had to move to a different area. And this is because I've seen people die. This is because I got attacked. I'd been stabbed myself. And I just knew in my mind there were 2 directions for me. There was prison, or there was being stabbed or ending up dead. But it was in that moment of darkness where I realized I need to make a bigger decision. I need to make a decision of what I'm going to do with my life. But it took me going and speaking to the people who were my elders and saying, and exactly telling them what I'm telling you right now on camera, is that I've had enough, and that my mental health at the time wasn't in a good place. I wasn't able to speak to any of them ever again. I wasn't welcomed. I was actually advised to stay out of the area. Because I was actually able to get out of the situation, I feel a responsibility to be a voice to other people. Since leaving the gang, my number 1 priority was to work on myself, to become a better person. So right now, I'm a mentor and a coach. As a mentor, I work with young people in schools, prisons, universities, helping them understand their mindset, helping them to make better decisions. And as a peak performance coach, I'm working with individuals to do exactly the same thing, but also to help them understand what drives them as humans. There are definitely aspects of being around the gang activity that I do regret. But right now, what I'm doing with young people, adults, and people at all levels of society, I wouldn't be able to have those conversations if I didn't go through what I've been through.
My name's Ed Calderon. I'm a former Baja police agent. I currently work as a security consultant in the United States. This is how crime works. Gun smuggling has armed the people that killed a lot of the people that I used to work with. A lot of these groups are actually stockpiling these firearms for long periods of time. It's hard for anybody to keep track of numbers and what gets found and what doesn't get found in a country where realistically nobody's keeping count. I think the flow is this. Drugs make their way north, and firearms and money make their way south. 70% of all firearms come from the north, from the United States. Operación Hormiga, they call it, Operation Ant, basically. Individuals carrying these small pistols across the border is a very common thing. So how many times can they cross the border? Well, if they're Americans, there's no limit to how many times they can cross that border. It's a pretty easy process to grabbing an AK-47, taking it apart into its basic components, putting it in a backpack, and just walking across some of the ports of entry. Another one is just basically having some of these firearms duct tape and or shrink wrapped onto your person. So let's imagine I have 5 mules. Each of them is capable of carrying around probably 2 guns on their legs, duct taped to their legs, maybe 2 more higher up on their thighs, and maybe 2 on their chest. Just multiply that by the amount of people you have doing that on a daily basis. Filling their pockets with ammunition, filling cornflakes boxes with ammunition as well. Tijuana is basically Silicon Valley when it comes to finding ways of smuggling things from through one of the most watched borders on the planet, basically. There's body shops, there's places that install radios, there's a bunch of people with a lot of experience in modifying vehicles down there. These businesses have been known to basically construct some of these concealment compartments in vehicles. Many occasions we would encounter or find firearms of different kinds and different vehicle hides in and around some of the places where we operated. Things like pushing the volume knob on the radio and then and then pulling the brake on the car will release a latch on the passenger side seat, revealing a concealed firearm. American vehicles are the preferred kind. You'll see recreational vehicles utilizing festive days where, spring break, where you'll see a surge of traffic going from the north to the south. A lot of the smuggling operations that have utilized concealment related to regular commercial shipments from the United States into Mexico of agricultural equipment, electrical appliances. A lot of these companies are basically utilized as fronts, and or without knowledge of these companies, they get loaded up with extra stuff on their way towards the border as they pick up a load somewhere in the United States and try and introduce it into Mexico. Another aspect of it is tunnels, drug tunnels. Again, firearms do get moved through those drug tunnels that have been operating and are still operating. Some of the most interesting ones that we managed to see was French-style trebuchets, which are basically giant catapults flinging things across the border at some ungodly speeds. Drone technology. The first crashed cartel drone that I directly saw was a large quad drone that crashed right on the border where the Tijuana River treatment plant is. We saw remote control vehicles, small ones, toy ones basically, loaded up with firearms, munitions, and money, being driven across the border by radio control. This is not my opinion, but the Border Patrol is one of the most corrupted federal institutions in the United States. There's been many cases and convictions against them. And it's these gun runners have people everywhere and have and own people in some of these ports of entry and pay corrupted officials across the border. It is interesting that you do not get searched at all at times crossing into Mexico. But if you cross into San Diego, your vehicle gets scanned, you have to step out of the car. Sometimes you have to take off your backpack and put it into an x-ray machine so it gets x-rayed. Density scanners might be utilized to try and detect some of the firearms going across the border. But those x-rays are used sporadically. Every now and then you'll get one get used, and it's rare that they find something. There's explosive detection dogs that are out there that are trained to detect explosives, munitions, for example. But again, you have to realize to not only create a dog canine program that is able to detect some of these things, but to maintain them is not an easy thing. In my experience, most of the arrests that we made were pitazos. A pitazo is a Mexican slang word for somebody told on them. Usually it's a personal thing, or usually it's somebody just eliminating competition. Those vehicle hides, a lot of these gun runners that have been caught in the past were random acts of pure luck or somebody trying to cut the competition out. "20-year-olds, 18-year-olds that have a clean record get hired to buy some of these guns in some of these places. And then they get gathered by the gun runners. Somebody that has a vehicle, who's a retiree American that crosses the border regularly somehow, maybe goes camping in Baja and stuff like that. It's a perfect candidate to be a mule for firearms. And you'll load a bunch of cars with people that are not who you would typically expect to stop at the border. So they basically utilize, people camouflage. What do people expect to see on the border as far as a drug smuggler? So they're going to shy away from that. Women get utilized a lot to move things around. Older women, because of the cultural stigma of Mexican police agents as far as trying to physically search a female, much less a female that is older in age. Social media is a very big part of it. Not only the advertisement of some of these things being sold in some places, but also recruitment of small purchase buyers on the US side. Cartels will troll places like TikTok, will have social media accounts related to one of their members or showcasing some of their activities online. And you'll see wannabes or people sending DMs and stuff like that on the US side, kids that want to be a part of the lifestyle. It's easy money for a kid, the economy, the lack of opportunities for a lot of these young people, even with educations down there, it's hard to find a job. I was approached several times when I was going through my process of turning into a police officer. And it only takes you doing something for a criminal organization like any of these cartels that operate on that border. It only takes once for them to know your name, to know how to contact you, to know that you are able to provide a service once. And the first time it's voluntary, the second time they're gonna tell you to do something. The person buying that gun and then handing it to somebody that's gonna then traffic it down south, he got probably $200, so that's the first payment, you know. And then that gun is now going to be probably doubled down south, or maybe 80% more of the value is going to be added onto it. So you have something that might be worth $800 and now worth $1,500 down there in the hands of somebody that wants that specific gun. The further south you go, the more expensive the firearm. That's kind of the rules about it. The closer you are to the border, the cheaper it is. The gun runner might have connections and he might paid somebody off. Usually if it's a large shipment, he'll have security with him as soon as he crosses. By this I mean people that are watching the load and move with him. You know, some of these people might drive it to a body shop, or they might drive it to one of these beach resorts where you can park your camper there, and that is when the deal happens. That could be where some money gets exchanged. It could have gotten exchanged on the on the northern side, but that's when the guns become property of whoever is going to get them. I've seen some of the gun runners put guns into places like Tecate, which is to the east in the desert, and basically in traditional places where they can avoid military checkpoints if they can. Or sometimes they don't even care because they actually paid off some of the military as well. It is not an easy process to get to procure a legal firearm in Mexico. Mexico has a single blanket firearms law. There's a single firearms store in Mexico. And if anybody wants a firearm legally in Mexico, you have to be able to pay for a bunch of documentations, and you usually end up with an overpriced pistol and not a lot of ways to buy bullets for that pistol unless you belong to a shooting club. And if you belong to a shooting club in Mexico, that's a very expensive thing. So in essence, legal possession of firearms is something that upper middle class people can afford. So people are desperate, and if they want security, usually in Mexico as a civilian, you'll go into the black market. Most of the gun-friendly places on the border are usually where these things are purchased. Texas, Arizona, sometimes even further north, where person-to-person sales and private sales are more permitted, where gun shows are pretty prevalent. Somebody will walk into a gun store and buy and purchase a couple of firearms. And some of these things get moved from a permissive, or a place where firearms laws are pretty pretty open, to places like California. And the reason you see that is because they're actually being utilized to pay drug loads sometimes. You also have a lot of people ordering some of these firearm parts through the mail now, which is a new method of smuggling as well. People will buy some of these things in the United States and then mail them down to Mexico under false labels and declarations as far as what's inside of those boxes for accessories for firearms, and being gathered at a private home, packaged and labeled falsely, and then sent south through packaging services. There's been many cases of things being taken off military bases in California, for example. Grenades that are clearly coming from military installations in the United States and/or are taken from military bases by corrupted soldiers. Every now and then you'll see bigger caliber equipment down there. The truth is those account for about 70% of illegal firearms found in Mexico in the hands of cartels and murder scenes and in the heads of dead sicarios. The truth is that it's probably more than that. They assassinate political candidates. They use explosives, terror tactics, psychological tactics. They capture, imprison people. Right now, currently, there's the Sinaloa cartel that's historically been dominating the border and a big part of Mexico. But now there's a new generation cartel, which is a very new, ultra-violent, militarized, almost guerrilla force that is taking over. And with groups like these, they have very specific firearms that they want to buy. So they're not only looking for a gold-plated AK-47 anymore, they're actually looking for night vision equipment to install on their firearms. They're looking for suppressors to put on a 50 caliber precision rifle that they procure. You'll see these commercial gun manufacturers making a very cool, aesthetically cartel-like pistol. It's obvious if you have a gun company creating a gold gun for a civilian market that they're trying to tap into a fascination and or a culture that is currently kind of being fostered, a narco culture. A narcocultura or narco culture is something that's been going on in Mexico for decades. The fascination or the treatment of some of these criminal organizations as almost a Robin Hood type character, where they're robbing from the rich and stealing from the poor. I can't tell you that making guns impossible to get or restricted or illegal, something like you would see in Australia, would be a solution to anything, because guns are already out there. There's a lot of people that want to blame the United States for everything. I think they clearly have responsibility when it comes to some of the firearms crossing that border. You have the United States basically outsourcing its counter-drug policy and counter-cartel policy to Mexico through money. The United States, I would say, should do a better job of keeping track of what that money is being used for in Mexico. Some of the arrests that have been made recently by American law enforcement sharing some of their information with Mexico, like sights, lasers, things of this nature, for accessories for firearms, basically. This is what's been every now and then gets caught. But again, it's a drop in the bucket with what actually gets through. When we saw some of this activity, and who do we tell? Do we tell the same law enforcement agencies that didn't let us know about all those guns walking across that border that ended up killing a bunch of my friends? You know, it was my experience to actually find some of these Fast and the Furious guns during my time active in the form of some FN-57 pistols that were used on some of my friends that I used to work with. This was an ATF operation. The ATF would approach places of gun sales and keep an eye out for certain types of purchases of firearms. The ATF wanted to let these guns walk so they can track them down to Mexico to see if they can somehow make a case for something bigger. But realistically, all they did was let almost 2,000 guns walk across the border. Most Mexicans saw that as a major, not only betrayal by the United States, but also a bunch of conspiracy theories started popping up of you know, why would you introduce so many firearms into Mexico? The anti-American sentiment in Mexico is at an all-time high, and it's been growing. I think as a Mexican, somebody who was actually born down there and experienced some of the violence that some of these firearms help foster down there. I think the biggest misconception about gun smuggling is that these guns have somehow, there's a lot of effort being put forth by the Mexican government to stop these guns from coming down to Mexico. The straw purchasers up here get a slap on the wrist. I think, yeah, some of those penalties should be steeper. The Mexican government, through Marcelo Ebrard, is basically sued a lot of the major American gun manufacturers. The only group legally allowed to sell firearms in Mexico is the military. So it's interesting that the Mexican government did a lawsuit against American gun manufacturers, but they didn't mention in that lawsuit the people that they buy their firearms from. Mexico has a very big problem with corruption, and it has attempted many times to curtail this corruption by developing whole organizations to try and keep police honest. I was put through FBI background checks. I did polygraph testing every year. But even with all of those safety precautions, people flipped. And when they left, they didn't hand over their rifles or their guns sometimes, so they would take them with them. I was a Baja police agent for about 12 years. I did that job till it was time to leave. The corruption levels in the institution that I was in became completely unsustainable, and anybody that wanted to actually do their job and be honest about it was not in fashion or in vogue at that time. I had to leave my job in a hurry. There's no retirement, no severance package. It's a pretty hard job to do. It's a pretty thankless one. But there's a lot of people that are in that fight, a lot of people that are honest, a lot of people that never took a dime. I somehow made it out alive of that system. After concluding my 12 years of service down there, I came to the United States, and utilizing some of the experience and know-how that I got from that experience down south, I now become a subject matter expert, do training for civilians, private companies, and the government across the country. Specifically, gun smuggling has armed the people that killed a lot of the people that I used to work with. It definitely has had an effect, not just on me, but on most of my generation. I want to give a voice to the countless people down there that went through some of the experiences that I went through. Some of the widows left behind, some of the orphans left behind by some of the conflicts that went on down there. I'm trying to keep that memory and that voice alive for them.
My name is Alastair Morgan. My younger brother Daniel was murdered in 1987, and I have been fighting for justice ever since.
Hi, I'm Neil Woods. I'm a former undercover police officer, and part of what I do now is I investigate corruption within policing.
This is how police corruption works.
We rely on our police for the rule of law, but often our police get corrupted. And what this means is that they are no longer acting in our interests. They are acting on somebody else's interests or their own interests. There is no more important asset to organised crime than a corrupt police officer, because that corrupt police officer is useful in so many ways.
Criminals need corrupt officers, you know. They want somebody who can get rid of a statement or who can alter a surveillance log or, you know, these tiny things.
Corrupt police officers also can interfere with an investigation and make a case fail at court.
For me, police corruption is anything that deviates from the oath to police the public without fear or favour. It's quite a neat little phrase, that, without fear or favour, but it means you don't take bribes, right, without favour. You don't look after people who are important to the exclusion of people who are less important or seen as less important in our society. Without fear or favour is a good way of compressing all that.
So a corrupt police officer can be put in place by getting somebody who's called a clean skin. They've got no previous convictions and they are coached to join the police, and they remain an asset, and some of them will remain a sleeper asset where they're not put at any risk. So they're only used for particular types of corruption. Sometimes they are used to help manipulate a third party who is another cop to help use information to blackmail them. Other information that is really useful to organised crime is information about someone's movements or where someone lives or a phone number or something like that. The more sinister use of information like that is to target rivals. Organised crime always have rivals. Violence is never very far away because control of the market means a lot of money. And if someone is a threat to that, then violence is used. And corrupt police are used to help facilitate that violence. That is something that is a regular use of corrupt assets. The most common form of corruption that I'm aware of is what we call noble cause corruption. Now, this is where police do something which is corrupt, but they do it not for their own financial gain, not because they're involved with organised crime, but because they want to catch the bad guy. And they see that the system is against them, and if they just tweak the rules a little bit, they've got more chance of getting a conviction. As an undercover police officer, I saw myself as fighting drugs organised crime, but I am guilty of some noble cause corruption. These police approached me and they said that their target for the operation was committing burglaries on old people, and he was doing some very sinister things when he came into their bedroom. He also happened to be a drug dealer. So I was being sent in to quite legitimately investigate him and catch him for dealing drugs. Now, a fundamental part of the rules was that you must not act as an agent provocateur, which means you must not cause someone to commit a crime if they wouldn't have done anyway, but you must also not cause them to commit a more serious crime than they would have done. Now, this guy wasn't capable of kilos. He just wasn't. But I talked him up. I said I need larger and larger amounts. And he would not have tried to supply a kilo. He ended up adulterating an ounce right down to a kilo. So the kilo is presented as a kilo, and he was caught with a kilo, but it was less than 1% pure. But he pleaded guilty to the trading of a kilo and got substantially more time in prison. Now, that was wrong of me, but it goes to show how easily you can get fired up by the need to catch dangerous people as a police officer, and how noble cause corruption can creep into it. So I'm guilty of it as well. Now, the problem is that leaves the officer or officers open to manipulation and blackmail, where they become puppets for the organised crime. Now, I know that I upset a lot of police officers when I talk about corruption, because it's understandable. Most of them, they're good people trying to do the best they can with some pretty crap laws, really. But we have to understand the extent of this, and we have to be clear-eyed about this. We have to be honest about this. It's the only way we have a chance of dealing with it.
Sorry, this narrative is something I've gone over so many times. Daniel was my younger brother by a year. At the age of 37, he was murdered with an axe. So it was a vicious, brutal, savage attack. Within 3 weeks, I was convinced, because of the events that took place, that there had been police involvement in Daniel's murder, which was a terrifying prospect. My brother expressed concerns about police corruption about a month before his murder, which was the last time I saw him alive. And he said, "Oh, it's a bent copper." And he named a name which I could not recall. It went out of my mind. And then he said, "Alastair, they're all over the place down here." I learned later, a year later at an inquest, that he believed his partner and Sergeant Fillery from the murder squad had been involved in a robbery, and he was thinking of going to an outside force, and then 2 days later he was dead. Sidney Fillery, who had been accused of involvement in the murder by another witness, he'd left the police force and within a year was running my brother's company with Jonathan Rees. After years and years of investigations, some of which in retrospect I know were corrupted, an exhibits officer in the first investigation, and he was disciplined or given words of advice. And I think that is the only penalty that anybody has suffered. In 2021, I took the decision to sue the Met Police. I do everything in consultation with my solicitor, who has stood by me for decades and advised me, helped me keep my sanity in dealing with this. He said there are legal grounds to do it, and B, it's probably the only form of accountability you're ever going to get from these people. And I think accountability, I've been wanting that for 35 years.
UK police have one of the best records in the world for solving murders. The systems that we have in place are incredible. They're like a well-oiled machine. I've been part of murder inquiry teams myself a few times, and it's incredible how they function and how efficient they are. Traditionally, in the UK, and certainly around the time of the Morgan murder, The murder detection rate, the percentage of murders which are solved in the UK was 90%. 90%. The ones that you don't solve tend to be organised crime murders. It's shocking it wasn't solved, like genuinely shocking. It's quite clear the whole problem was police corruption, and it's quite clear that it wasn't adequately investigated because of police corruption. And then when there were inquiries set up, those inquiries were inadequate to the point that it's difficult not to conclude that corruption was preventing them working properly. An informant is somebody who provides information to the police, often referred to as CHIS, a covert human intelligence source in the UK. So an informant will generally come into contact with the police when they're arrested for a crime. Organised crime know who within their ranks has just got caught, and they know that they are going to get approached by the police to be asked to be an informant. And so then it becomes a sort of Machiavellian game in how that plays out. So often, informants are used to get rid of rivals, because if the market is so competitive that if you get rid of rivals, you actually can make more money. That's the way the market works. Other ways of informants being involved with the police is they can be paid. And there are some informants who actually earn a living doing this. And informants can get very savvy as to the value, financial value of certain types of information. The trouble is that the majority of people of informants who present that way, act that way, are also working for organised crime. All of the accountability for the use of informants, CHIS, is internal. All of it. The tasking of an informant has to be authorised by senior officers. But there's nothing to say that those senior officers are not corrupt, either through noble cause corruption or full corruption. And we know that some of them are. If a police officer wants to search someone's house, they get a search warrant. In order to get that search warrant, they have to go to a magistrate's clerk and prove to the magistrate's clerk that there is justification for doing so. The magistrate's clerk will then allow the police officer to apply to a magistrate, and the magistrate will either agree or not. If a CHIS or undercover operative wants to come into your life, and if that CHIS, that informant or undercover operative, wants to manipulate you into doing something different, then they can do that. It is the most intrusive thing the police can do, and there is no external oversight at all. It's cops judging cops. And those informants that have that power to come into your life, they're usually criminals, because that's why they're useful. Whistleblowers do not get looked after in the police in the United Kingdom. My friend was in danger of his life for trying to be a whistleblower. He was both whistleblowing about corruption and also racism, and his colleagues turned on him. He was bullied. The corrupt cops have a network of supporters, friends, and they will use and manipulate them to fight against the allegation. They will bully them. So there's a directed response by those corrupt cops. But also there is a culture where cops don't want to believe it of their colleagues and will be very suspicious of anyone who is saying anything critical or suggesting them of wrongdoing. They just won't believe it. This is someone that they've been alongside. This is someone who's had their back. This is someone that they've had to rely on and they've done long night shifts with.
I mean, I know a police officer, former Met officer, who came upon serious corruption. He knew about stuff, he was kicking up about it. A man who later became chairman for the Independent Police Complaints Commission said to me, my friend, the former police officer, he said, "Oh, I'll just drop this, you can get the job that you want, bribery, offering to say, you get a promotion, if you shut up about this," and he wouldn't,
But bear in mind that there's also an institutional failure to admit it, because the police have a duty to maintain public confidence. So that means that they don't advertise the extent of the corruption, and they don't want to find out. They don't want the public to think that they're corrupt. It's one of the most energetic and hard-working cops, and he's gone up against organised crime, including transnational organised crime, in his work. But he'd never been in fear of his life until he started whistleblowing on corrupt cops. He had to go into witness protection from the corrupt cops in the Met. The last defence that the police can have against corruption is the witness protection. Where the police fear that corruption means that those people are not safe, then they are put into a witness protection programme, which means they are given a false name, they are moved to a different place. And it's a really brutal thing to have to do to someone. According to the rules of the system, you cannot have any contact forever with your friends, your family, your community, anyone you've ever known. And the reason that this horrible system exists is because of how insidious and ubiquitous police corruption is. But of course, even that system gets corrupted. I know someone who worked within the witness protection system. They told me that at least half of their team were actually corrupt and that nobody was safe at all. The database for the witness protection system is completely isolated from other computer systems. They're not connected at all. So theoretically, they are already bomb-proof. But of course, any system is only as fallible as the humans operating it. And gangsters don't corrupt computers, they corrupt cops. I myself looked after 5 protected witnesses. I was acutely aware of the fact that we'd been told that Greater Manchester Police couldn't be trusted in this regard. So that we took the view that we couldn't even necessarily trust the National Witness Protection system. And we very carefully managed our witnesses for a long time outside that system. The Met, or the Metropolitan Police, is the police of Greater London, so all of the wider city of London. The Met operates in a different way to every other police force in the UK. It has various centralised responsibilities that other police don't have. So, for example, they are in charge of terrorist investigations. They have the National Crime Agency in London as well, so they work closer with the National Crime Agency. And they have other central responsibilities as well. The Met gets a lot of bad press. They get most of the attention for anything that goes wrong, and people want to bash the Met. But I have to say, in this case, the Met does have the biggest problem with corruption in the United Kingdom. It does. I mean, it's hardly surprising. It's by far the biggest police service. There's more organised crime concentrated in London. There was an internal investigation, an operation called Operation Tiberius in the Metropolitan Police. It's many years ago now. And it showed the sheer extent of corrupt police. And most of those corrupt police were manipulated and corrupted by the informant system. Now, part of the response to that, although there's never been any public response from the Met, that report's never really been addressed. One response to that was the idea that you can defend against corruption by limiting the number of years a source handler can work in that role. And it's limited in most police forces now around the country to 5 years. And this was seen as a way of helping prevent this corruption, that was this development over time, this corrupting over time that was happening. But all that's happened is it's actually cast the net wider for organised crime. It's given them more opportunities and more people to come into contact with. It's completely gone against the Met. And I do know that corruption still exists. I have to make something really, really clear about corruption. At least 99% of corruption within the police is caused by the money from the illicit drugs market. There isn't enough value in any other crime to cause the kind of corruption that exists.
The black economy with drugs, etc., is vast. And the amount of money that these drug barons have sloshing around and to use to bribe. Their tentacles reach into every level of the judiciary, the police, politicians. So that kind of money, it creates corruption.
I have had very personal experiences and come up against this corruption. There was lots of pressure on me to get intelligence and find out about a particular gang called the Bestwood Cartel, who at that time were at war with everybody in Nottingham. There was daily shootings. And I'd been on that operation for 4.5 months. I'd just got a really significant breakthrough. I'd managed to buy some drugs off one of the lieutenants of Colin Gunn. The next day, we'd been working very long hours and 2 of my backup team went off sick. And so I was introduced to 2 new police officers that had not been involved in that operation before. I met the first one, shook his hand, I had no problem with him. The second one, I shook his hand and the hairs just went up on the back of my neck. This guy was just wrong. So I went to the senior investigating officer for the operation and said, look, boss, I cannot have this cop knowing what I'm doing. I just can't. I don't trust him. I won't be able to relax. And he said, fine. I didn't think much more of it. But then 12 months later, when Colin Gunn was actually brought down, it turned out that this cop I'd taken exception to, a guy called Charlie Fletcher, was an employee of Colin Gunn. As I say, he was an employee, but he was paid to join the police. And he was paid £2,000 a month on top of his police wages, plus bonuses for good information. He'd been in the police for 7 years by the time he was caught. When he was introduced to me, he knew I was undercover, and he was very, very close to finding out exactly what I was up to. Now, at the start of that operation involving that corrupt police officer, Colin Gunn was letting everybody on the streets know that if he ever caught an undercover police officer, he would be snatched off the street and tortured to death. So those were the stakes that we were working with.
The biggest sums of money, black money floating around, are from the drugs world. And that is a major influence on police corruption, has been for a long time, I think. My view is that drugs are a public health problem. They should not be criminalised, and that the supply should be taken into the hands of the state in order to deprive organised crime of the funding to corrupt. I mean, I think our drugs policy is completely crazy.
I know I upset a lot of British police by talking about the corruption in this country, but we still have at least a claim to the best police in the world. We do. There is a lot to be proud of in the United Kingdom in our police, but we have the same problem as the rest all around the world, is that organised crime control the drug supply. So in that we have things in common with every other police service around the world. There really is nothing we can do about police corruption as long as the power is in the hands of organised crime. We can try and tweak our systems here and there, we can try and increase our vetting, but it really won't make any difference at all, because this is about the fact that organised crime are rich, and they are rich because they are in control of the drug supply. And as long as that goes on, police corruption is not only inevitable, it will be ubiquitous.
So in the police corruption that was happening that you witnessed, why was that happening?
Well, I think that there were drugs involved in that as well. I strongly suspect that there were police involvement with drugs in that.
My name is Sayce Holmes-Lewis. I was first assaulted by the Met Police aged 14. Since then I've been stopped over 30 times. This is how police racism works. People don't really understand what it feels like to be stopped and pulled over in your car and being followed by officers and your heart's beating, the adrenaline's going. People don't really understand that this is something where you think potentially, if something goes wrong here, I could lose my life. I've been dealing with the police professionally for a long time, but also personally too. But all my views and expressions are based on my personal experience. I was assaulted at the age of 14, just coming home from school in my school uniform. I was at the train station on the train, and a police officer came onto the train and told me to get off before he took me off. I questioned him and said, look, whatever I'm supposed to have done, let me know. And when I walked up to him, he dragged me off the train, assaulted me, punched me, hit me twice in the abdomen with his truncheon, handcuffed me, dragged me with the handcuffs along my front all the way down the platform, 2 flights of stairs, and then de-arrested me because of public outcry of adults and my friends. Never told me what I was supposed to have done. Went home to press charges against the officer. Was thrown out by the Crown Prosecution Service, the criminal justice system here, for lack of evidence. And we had eyewitness accounts of about 12 people and CCTV evidence too. But that changed my whole outlook and feeling towards policing. I saw that adults weren't able to give me justice. That manifested itself through anger, because that was the only thing that I had to hold on to. So after the assault at age 14, I experienced over 30 stop and searches, since then. But it was always the same language. You look like a criminal, look at the clothes you're wearing, why are you in the area? This area is known for drugs and criminals such as yourself. It's just the way and the manner, it's the language. And it made me feel like a criminal, even though I wasn't involved in any of that stuff. I was literally at the mercy of whatever officer, who came to contact with me, whatever they wanted to do. And that just made me feel worthless at times, like less than human. And for some people, there's no coming back from that. So the London gangs matrix was born out of the 2011 uprisings after the shooting of Mark Duggan. And the gangs matrix was basically a database of predominantly black males that were seen to be part of gangs or organised crime in London. But many people on this list were guilty by association. They might have been family members, friends, uncles, acquaintances, but they were on this list. And this information was used to criminalise and target a large number of young black males in particular for things that they weren't even a part of. There were people on there that were criminals and part of that, but however, it was very disproportionate. And a lot of people on that gangs matrix, on that database, had information shared about them with other agencies, such as schools, businesses. It was sharing information about people who weren't actually criminals and using that to decrease their life chances and opportunities within education, employment, training. But this is also linking that to the criminalisation of black youth and dehumanising black youth and actually creating a stereotypical narrative around criminality, and that it's attributed to the black community only. But there are gangs from all walks of life, all backgrounds in London. But again, there seems to be a real succinct focus on black deviance, on black criminality. Stop and search, it's a police power which is used to stop anyone that they feel might be potentially committing a crime or may have committed a crime. And it's used under one of 3 sections routinely in our communities. PACE, Section 1 of PACE, 1984, which is the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, which allows police to stop people based on reasonable doubt. Another one that's commonly used is Section 23 of the Misuse of Drugs Act. This is something which is routinely used in our communities, especially with young black boys, to stop them and to detain them under Section 23 with the purpose of carrying out a search for drugs. And that is been used on myself many times. There are people that are consuming drugs, in affluent areas, but they're not being policed, in the way that some of our young black boys are being policed in some of our areas. Another one which is very controversial is Section 60, which is a police power which is used when violence is anticipated in certain areas or certain boroughs. This can be used to stop anybody without reasonable grounds. When we talk about suspicion and we talk about reasonable grounds and evidence, those seem to go out the window when it's a black person. Many people are not against stop and search, they're against the way that it's carried out and the way that it makes them feel and the legacy of that stop and search. when my grandparents came here from the Windrush generation in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Sus law was literally just that, suspicious law. If they thought you looked suspicious, they could stop you. And that came derived from the 1824 Vagrancy Act, which was used to actually imprison vagabonds and travellers and people with no fixed abode. And that was revamped in 1984, Section 1 of PACE. But it's still been used in disproportionate ways to really criminalise and oppress large volumes of working class people based on their demographic and where they're from. There's a real lack of empathy in policing, and that causes a lot of the trauma and reinforces a lot of the trauma in our areas as well, and the trauma that we face as Black Britons and the Black British experience. So it does make it difficult, but most of the officers that do it, they want to, and they want to make you feel a certain way, and they want to reinforce that power dynamic, and that shouldn't be the way forward, you know. And often, many of these searches end up with no further action. It's not really an effective tool. 78% of stop and searches, no further action, with only about 8% leading to a conviction. So that tells you within itself that it's something which needs to be used in an effective way based on evidence and reasonable grounds, and not just on a hunch. My response to those figures, 3 out of 5 Black children being strip searched by officers, it just showcases the issue that we have, that officers and adults feel that it's necessary to do something so intrusive. And I keep using the word trauma because trauma is a driver for the negativity in our communities, especially with a lack of mental health support. And we don't access enough mental health and therapy because Black Africans and Caribbeans is seen as a sign of weakness, historically. We have a real racially motivated outlook towards young people when it comes to crime, but also the adultification of young people within those areas. It shouldn't happen. We talk about young Black boys in education that may have growth spurts, 6'4", 13. There's a real fear around the physicality of a Black boy, a Black man, and that's something that's been embedded, over time. You go back to Margaret Thatcher when she came to power in 79 and 80, there was this fear of the Black man, the Black mugger, the person who was going to be the Black robber. And these seeds have been sown over time. That's at the forefront of many people's minds, and because they've already been dehumanized, in that thought process, this doesn't matter. Because if you don't have empathy, you don't have understanding of what that will feel like, then you don't care. And that's why I do what I do and speak about it, because I know what it feels like to be assaulted by an officer. I know what it feels like to be adultified, by police officers and within education. But until you actually feel something, experience it, you won't understand it. There needs to be guidelines in terms of how we then safeguard that young person, whether it's justified or not. How do we protect them? That's probably one of the most dehumanizing things that's happened, to some people. It's happened to my cousin last year at the hands of the TSG, just as he was delivering food as an Uber Eats rider. Ended up being in the cell, being strip searched, no phone call, disappeared for 17 hours. He hasn't recovered from that. Many of these young people are not going to be able to recover from that. They don't have the support. But quite simply, if many of these officers, if that was their child, would they agree to it? I don't think they would. So the Territorial Support Group, TSG, they are an enforcement arm of the police, the Met Police Force in London. They have different vans, so blue vans, and they police events mainly, public order events as well, and protests and things like that. But before the TSG were created, we had the SPG, which was a special patrol group. Now, my uncles and grandparents, they were routinely policed by the SPG. So the SPG used to go around and literally just pick up Black boys, Black men, assault them, put them in a cell, and then release them without charge. And it was all based on sus law, suspicion that they were criminals. So the SPG was disbanded, I believe, in the late 80s. And then we had the TSG, which was created, which is basically the same thing, just revamped with a new name. So they go into communities, again, policing communities, targeting people that might be criminals in their eyes or drug dealers or whatever it may be, but they use stop and search and also Section 60, which is being able to search people without reasonable grounds, which is a special police power. The TSG undo a lot of the good work of neighbourhood teams that the police have in communities. They routinely come in and it's enforcement before engagement. You know, they don't want to ask questions, they go in heavy-handed, cuffs on, using force, and then they ask questions after. They get to impart that violence without any recourse, without any repercussions. And that doesn't help. It really doesn't help. And that's a real issue within our communities, and that's where a lot of these incidents happen, negative incidents where disproportionate force is used against people. So the TSG have a lot to answer for. We see young boys being handcuffed, being restrained, you know, knees being put on their chest whilst they're on the floor, hands around their neck, like even after what happened to George Floyd. If it was carried out in a different manner, if things were diffused and de-escalated, then we would still have some of these people here today. Even the other day, you know, young man, Deshaun Joseph, 14, in Croydon, stopped by police. They felt that he was a criminal and just committed a crime, but they restrained him and had a grown adult with both knees in the back of this young man who was face down on the floor, you know, and he thought he was going to die. You know, in the interview that he gave, he says, I thought I was going to die. And how do you counteract that trauma? Who's going to give that young man support? Who's going to apologize to him? Because it's not going to be the Met. You know, we talk about Joy Gardner, same thing, suffocation. And these are not isolated incidents. So that means that there's something going wrong within those processes, within those systems, and the people that we have who are supposed to be enforcing the law, because these things shouldn't be happening. Based on the evidence I've come across, a lot of the police custody deaths in relation to black people, and the ones that I've come across, have been highly suspicious. And again, the evidence that is used to then convict or not convict the officers who are involved in the case and being charged isn't really forthcoming. The criminal justice system and the powers that be protect a lot of officers when these instances happen. I think that's one of the reasons we don't get the justice we deserve. You know, there's a database of officers, hundreds of officers that have committed crimes. And these names a lot of them are withheld, you know, and they're protected. But we shouldn't be protecting these criminals because day-to-day criminals are not protected, you know, by the media or anybody else. You know, we've had 390 police custody deaths with the Met Police since 1990, and disproportionately black people are at the heart of that. And there have been a number of incidents, you know, with Kevin Clark, who was basically suffocated. You know, he said I couldn't breathe. Nobody listened to him. You know, he ended up dying, you know, in police custody. And this is something that's routinely happened. Dalian Atkinson, ex-football player for Aston Villa, who had issues with mental health, but was killed at the hands of the police, was tased 9 times, kicked in the head by an officer, which all attributed to his death. But that officer was actually charged, but only got 8 years. That's not justice for me. It's not justice for the family. The fact is, this man abused his power, so did his colleagues, and were aware of it, and no one stopped it. But these are state-assisted deaths, and I feel that they're protected by the powers that be. There's a different set of rules, you know, for officers when it comes to the law. So we have to be consistent in terms of how we enforce the law. And until these things stop and we get true justice, and criminals within the police force are going to prison for, you know, minimum terms, life sentences for taking people's lives, we're not actually going to change the perception of the police. There are many instances of where how we are received when we're complaining about crime and we are victims of crime, we are then made to feel like we shouldn't be victims of crime, and that it's not important. In relation to Richard Okereke, who went missing, who was then found to have passed away, but when his mum went to the police station, she complained and said, my son's gone missing, we need to find him. And one of the officers responded by saying, if you can't find him, how are we supposed to find him? Just shows you the lack of empathy in policing. And even though we're victims in crimes, we're made to feel like criminals. And that's a lot of the racial bias and stereotyping that we have to face. But there are numerous incidents of black people going missing and reporting the crime or reporting it as a disappearance, and nothing happens. As a human being, like how do you sleep at night knowing now that that person has died, is no longer here, and that was your response to his mum? There's got to be something within that recruitment process going wrong for us to be having these type of people attached to the police service, especially the Met, but in other police forces across the country. There's a major failing in the recruitment. You know, are we doing tests and personality tests? Are we doing, tests around psychology, the psychology of people that are joining the force? Like, how are we measuring, these things, and how are we recruiting the wrong people over and over again? Parts of the Met, parts of police forces are deeply insidious because they don't want to change. And if colleagues are not actually calling this out, then you're part of that problem. You're part of the issue, despite all the good work and great work you might do in terms of policing, but you have to call it out. There was a man called Gwenton Slowly, who was trained in the police, much like myself, who was the subject of a targeted kind of raid by a group of officers that he actually trained. They literally stopped him from earning a livelihood. So he took that to court and won the case, defamation of character amongst other things, and he was paid out hundreds of thousands for that, that mistreatment. But also they tried to destroy him, and some officers weren't happy that someone from the community that was a black man was educating them around this and being paid to do so. And that's the reality of some of our police officers that feel that they're above the law and they can do whatever they want. And that's a really scary thought, because how far has that gone in history, and how far will it go in the future? The Met have got a massive issue around public trust because of the way they've consistently mistreated communities. And this is not just about a black British thing, this is about working class people being oppressed in the way that the state has routinely oppressed many people across this world. An apology is going to be the first thing, but the actions have to back up what you're saying. How do you build trust and build a relationship that's never been there? It's by listening, being empathetic, and actually working in conjunction and in collaboration with these communities. That's the only way that we're going to build a relationship that's never been there. I think the transparency and accountability needs to be across the board. If senior Met officers are failing within their role, they need to be gone, not seconded into other roles, just gone. Like, you need to get this insidious side of the police out, and you have to target individuals within that institution. And unfortunately, that's the only way we can do that, because ultimately, more senior officers are still having these same outlooks and having these same conversations in rooms which are close to us, and they're based around stereotypes and racially motivated stereotypes. And until people change and have a more inclusive outlook towards people in general, then we can't solve these things within society, let alone an institution. So I've been training the Met Police since June 2020, so it's over 2 years now. And this was after a stop and search that I experienced during the first lockdown. And I saw these officers stop a young white boy and a black boy. And it didn't look right. 12 officers around 2 boys. So I stopped in my car, wound down my window and said, "Boys, are you okay? Are you all right? Everything all right?" They shouted over, says, "Yeah, we're fine. Thank you for checking in." I drove around the block, back onto the main road, and then I saw the blue lights behind me and I thought, oh, let me pull over. It's not for me. And then they pulled me over under Section 23 of the Misuse of Drugs Act. And it was, you look like a criminal, you look like you just made a drug deal, the car you're driving. And then I realized that they were children. They were 21, 22, 23. I was 37 at the time, and I said, you know what, I need to change this. I decided that, I'm going to train you how to talk to young people, especially black youth, and how to engage with them positively, because you've done this to me for 24 years and I had no solution. And then 6 weeks later, I was in New Scotland Yard, opening my first session around conscious bias, racial equity in policing, but Also linked to stop and search. It's part of the solution. It's not going to be the solution. It's part of the solution in getting people to understand that we're all human and that we all want safer communities. So if we treat each other with that sort of respect and we work diligently in anti-racism and stand in anti-racism and challenge the systems that are in place, then we have a better police service, but a better society, better community.
I am Max Brandrett, master forger, and I made over £500,000 forging art. This is how crime works. In those days, you didn't have the technology to send them up to the lab to be tested. Today, you would never get away with it. They can tell you the day you painted it, the colour, how old it is, the canvas has got to be right. You know, you can't forge. So in my day, you didn't have all this technology. From the 60s, 68 to the 70s is when you could still hit it, but not today. No way. We used to buy what we call pot boilers. Pot boilers are old rubbish pictures that somebody would be an amateur, but as long as the canvas at the back was right. You couldn't do an old picture from the 17 or 1800s on a canvas that's mitered. You had to do it sort of when it's looking the part. If you did it on the auctioneer would suss it out. And if they've got a bowl of flowers on or landscape, you rub it down, you sand it down to a flat level, prime it, gesso primer, undercoat on top of that, white undercoat, do the sides, and then do your painting. As for starting, do the sky, get the drying system done, with a Brolac undercoat, air dryer. Then you just sketch it out. So that was the preparation. I think this is where the experts couldn't work out, well, if this is a fake, I can match the colour. It's just there, I see it and I think, I would know the colour straight away, what to use, If you use oil paints, normal oil paints, it takes probably about 3 months to dry, right? But my little way of doing it was I found a quick drying process, Brolac or any house undercoat, white undercoat. And then you put that with your paint, you put your hairdryer over it and it will dry probably in about 2 hours. That's why we could do so many, and that was it. So the aging is a whole new world. What do you think happens when you've got a picture in a frame for years and years and years? So when it's inside the slip frame, it'll be clean, won't it? And all the dirt will show it. So we used to age it, fake it up with a walnut scrumble, like dirty sort of tea stain colour, and then get your terps and run your finger down with the cloths all the way around so you've got a neat line. So when they say, it's been in the frame for years and years, put it back in the frame, that was it. I wanted to crack the pictures. Hence a very magic thing which somebody showed me years ago from an old guy that used to restore. He said bead glue is perfect. Bead glue is a Scotch glue. It's used for woodwork. Well, you're too young to remember, but it was always a smelly sort of gooey look. So I bought £2 of this. I put it in a saucepan, he told me. Overnight, next morning it's a jelly. Then you think, right, put it on the stove, bring it up to a varnish. If you overdo it, it goes too thick, so you just got to get it right. Get your picture, right, you give it a coat of this varnish, this bead glue varnish, you take it to a heater. It has to be an electric heater, it can't be dry heat, and you circulate the painting like that, and you think, God, it's cracking, it's working, and you do a bit on the top of the sky, and you look at it, you can actually hear it cracking. Wash off the bead glue with warm water on your tap, and then, right, you've got all the cracks. Empty your hoover on it, rub all the hoover in, all the dirt, all the cracks filled with dirt. And then after that, the nails that you've had in the garden for 6 months, in the tin, because you put water in, they've rusted, make sure that the nails go back in the place where it was, because they'll suss you out. Tap it all back, under glass, white polish, back in the frame, talcum powder, because it smells after a while. It takes off the bead glue stink and it rots, to be honest, and then hence you've got it. So there we go. On there, looking good. Auction room, Saturday, 3 or 4 of those, boom. Had the finance in the beginning. He would buy the canvases, he would buy the frames. He gave me sort of like money in the beginning till we got started. I was in Portobello Road, and he'd come along and he said, "I love your painting, sir." He said, "I'll give you 200 quid for the lot. Come and have a drink with me afterwards." So we went to the pub just in Portobello Road, and he started talking about, we want to do this big time. Yeah, I could have done it on my own, but not as well. We were going as father and son, like, you know, he was 45, I was 19 years old. So the first auction we hit was Lots Road. We got into the auction room, and you know, if you sort of make them look, they're very important. We would say, "Sir, morning, Governor." They go, "Yeah, morning." So I've got some smudges in the car, so do you have a look for me? And he goes, "Yeah, bring them in." He said, "That's no fine." He said, "Dad," because, "Dad, bring them in, will you?" So we bring them in the bloody bin liner, don't we? So and he goes, "What's that down there? That looks interesting." This is the very posh guy on the desk. This is how silly it was. The auctioneer would go, Albert Derby. But what he didn't know, that Albert Derby used to sweep floors in the Brighton in a pub. And I thought, when I was painting these fakes, I said, "Max, what are we going to do?" I said, "Let's put," I know, a friend, a guy, an old fella I met was in his 80s, called Albert Derby. I went, "Yeah, do that." So I put Albert Derby on this fake picture, went in the auction, and he told me he's a listed painter. I went, "Yeah, right, that's how much they know." That was it. And then he said to me, "What's the other thing there?" "Oh, it's some cat picture, sir." I said, "Did you not know what this was?" It's a Louis Wain." "Who's Louis Wain, sir?" I thought it was Batman's. Anything to do with Batman. Sorry. And my would go, "You see, son, this guy knows all about it. When you've got respect like that, and the way the knowledge he has is incredible. So you look and learn." But again, to make that auctioneer feel like he's got the knowledge and you know nothing. Then the big thing was the auction rooms. When you go into the auction room, you've got to be careful. The guy on the desk doesn't go into the auction on the night, because he spots 2 of you bidding for the bugger. Then you think, "Hello, why are they bidding against their own picture?" Sometimes we nearly brought the buggers back. And what we used to do, you'd have a preview. So on the day, you would have people come in to look at the pictures, see what they wanted to buy. We used to stand next to my pictures, or 2 of them, and you would hold you and you pretend not to listen. You go, "Oh," and the other go, "Albert Derby, it's interesting. So it looks pretty good to me. You can have a pop at this." And you'd mark it down, think, "Right, I've got him." He was in one side, I was in the other, and we used to ring it. So my sign was for when we were bidding up. We used to get to 2.5 grand, and I'd either do that I'm out, and he would carry on. And I used to do that twice. If you're going to overdo it, you buy the bloody thing back yourself. Yeah, so we hit the oh, don't say that. No, we hit Bond Street Gallery for 45 grand. And we got 25 in readies and the rest in a cheque, which we cashed immediately. There you go. That's the other way. Mostly dealers would buy. They would buy for reselling. Or you get privates, you know. Ours, we did a lot, we fooled a lot of people with ours, but we had never had any comebacks. Never once did they suspect that they were well, how do you feel about this? You've got a picture, you're listening to all these people talk about it. It's 4 weeks old and it's dated 1797. So, you know, who knows? It just goes on. Somebody legged it, somebody grassed us up, and they raided us one night when I was in Fulham. Found all this bead glue, old paintings, stretchers, everything. Then they charged me with forgery and deception. Got off, I didn't, I got nicked. And I had a single cell because I asked the governor. I asked the governor for oil paints, he agreed, and then pencils and paper and things like that. And so he came to me, and we were visiting in those days. So what he used to do is to bring the paper in, and he'd have it up his sleeve, and he used to slide out some paper that used to nick from the library, from clean pages. And the pages were really old, 1830s, so I could do Samuel Palmer drawings in my cell, put it in my Bible. Next time he came up, I used to roll them up and roll them up his sleeve. Used to take them back home, frame them up, shove them in the auction. So when I came out, I had about $4,000 coming home. So I was forging in prison. If I walked into Christie's or Sotheby's, the bloody bell would ring, because I'm on camera, aren't I? Well, I'm banned from auctions, aren't I? I'm banned from every auction. In the old days, if there was a bang on the door, I was halfway out the bloody window, but I don't have to do that now. I just feel content with my lot. Born in Buckingham Road in Brighton, basement flat, 5 of us, and it was poverty. It got so bad that they decided to take us away. So that was the first place with Barkingside we went to, the children's home. I did all that, came back to my mother, I ran away to London, and then I thought the only job you could get was on the circus. So I went up to the circus in Chipping Norton. When I left the circus, I hit Portobello Road. Saw lots of paintings, I thought, I can do those myself. And so I did about 5 or 6 pictures, then off you go, Portobello Road, here I come. Do I feel remorse? And to be honest, I just felt it was survival, you know. I didn't think, perhaps I was that age, I was only 19 or 20. My book is called Max Brandrett, Britain's #1 forger. And it's not about how to fake a picture, it's my life story.
My name is John Pennisi. I'm a former made member of the Lucchese crime family. This is how crime works. We were involved in a Range Rover scam where the Range Rovers were purchased or financed from the United States here and shipped to countries like China, where they had a specific Range Rover that didn't have all the bells and whistles that the Range Rovers in the United States had, and they were sold almost for 4 times the amount. And there was a stipulation that if you purchased a Range Rover from the United States, you would sign a paperwork saying that you weren't going to export the car. They were buying them maybe for 100, 120,000, and it was being sold in China for about up to 400,000. A lot of members of organized crime went into legitimate businesses, whether they opened up pizzerias, restaurants, construction companies, and things like that. One of the legitimate businesses was in the Fulton Fish Market, which is where most of the fish that goes to the restaurants in New York City comes from. Rudolph Giuliani came into the Fulton Fish Market and seen that there were members of organized crime planted there with businesses that were legit, and he took them all out. So that was one example of ways that which they tried to slip into legitimacy, but because of who they were, law enforcement got them out. So the food industry was always a big earn for organized crime in the past, and it is present today. As earning capabilities been taken away from Cosa Nostra because of the government and the FBI, they went a little more in the legitimate way of doing things, creating companies that supply food. But what they would do is they would go to restaurants and insist that they have to use their product and their companies. So the specific companies that they would create would be the companies which supply the restaurants, whether it be pasta, sauce, cheese, water, and even imported food from Italy and Sicily. A lot of members of organized crime have purchased their own restaurants and went into that legitimate business. They have took control of restaurants as well that weren't theirs. They'll come in as partners. So they would create companies that become vendors for food, which supply the restaurant industry. As far as Hollywood, in years past, organized crime had a big hold on the unions there, and that's how they were able to manipulate and control what went on in Hollywood with the movies and music business. The sanitation was big years ago, and they brought a big case on them. Years ago, there was a big arrest of the private sanitation companies. They were charging so much money towards local businesses to pick up their garbage. But even presently today, members of organized crime own companies that are private sanitation. So there's still a big presence in the sanitation industry. Tax evasion or tax fraud and money laundering is something that always went on in Cosa Nostra in the past and still to this present day. Illegal money that's being made in the street today is not being claimed on taxes. That's tax evasion or tax fraud right there. Money laundering happens when organized crime, they're making money and they're buying legitimate businesses, restaurants and companies, so they're washing the money, illegal money, through these legitimate businesses. Insider trading was bigger years ago, where Cosa Nostra went into the financial center and created companies, and they were finding out information. The SEC came down on them. There was a lot of people who were indicted and went to prison as a result of that, and they kind of pushed them out. So counterfeiting went on more years ago. There was always counterfeit bills, 10s, 20s, where people were pushing this counterfeit money back into society. Today it's a little more difficult because the way the bills are made, you know, the bills have specific emblems on it and wires in the bills. So the government made it harder for members of organized crime to counterfeit their bills. In Sicily and Italy, they use cryptocurrency, especially to buy narcotics. And I believe that in New York, the same thing's happening. A lot more criminals are using cryptocurrency to do scams and as a means to pay for things to do criminal activities. Cryptocurrency would come into effect again, where the loan shark could get paid back in cryptocurrency today. Loan sharking is a way in which Cosa Nostra made money years ago and makes money up to the present date, where they loan somebody money at a rate or where there's VIG involved. The VIG is the interest that they're making off the principal of the money. A lot of times people in the street life can't walk into a bank for whatever reason and get a loan. They'll go to a loan shark. Gambling is always going to be an earn for Cosa Nostra. It was done on a much larger scale. They had casinos, illegal casinos, a lot of card games. Today, there's not a lot of that going on as it did years ago, but you're always going to have your bookmaker taking action to make some money. So a lot of times, gambling and loan sharking go hand in hand. There's gambling going on. Maybe somebody runs out of money. There's a loan shark, somebody that's lending money. They borrow the money from the loan shark. And gamblers are always going to be owing money. So in turn, they go to the loan shark. So those two specific ways to make money go hand in hand for Cosa Nostra. So gambling's been taken to a new level in present times, where now there is online gambling. So Cosa Nostra has people who have online gambling, mostly in Costa Rica. They'll build websites and they'll have their customers go online and they gamble through the website. Years ago, it was all done through paper, people writing things down. There was none of that online activity. As far as gun trafficking and arms trafficking, obviously it was bigger years ago, but every family has a member or certain members that are involved in guns. And you're going to see a little gun trafficking where somebody's leaving the state or maybe getting guns from another state and bringing it back into New York for sale or for use. So there's always some kind of gun activity going on within organized crime. Drug dealing and drug trafficking was done on a much larger scale years ago. It is a big earn for Cosa Nostra, but I think it's done on a much, much lower scale than it was years ago. At one time, prostitution was a big, big earn for organized crime, as well as the whole sex industry, pornography and all of that. Today, that no longer exists as a money-making opportunity for them. Years ago, organized crime made a ton of money through the 1-800 sex calls, where you would call up and talk sexual with a woman on the phone. It was a big, big earn for them, so that's no longer available to them. Extortion is another means in which to make money, where years ago it would be maybe pushing up on local businesses, restaurants, and have them pay extortion money. It's harder to do today. People are not afraid to pick up and call 911 and call the cops on these people. They're not afraid of repercussions from them. So today, it's mostly where one business is owed money by another business. They would try to go about getting their money in any other way. And then as a last resort, they would come to one of us and we would collect the money, if we could collect the money, and we would sometimes take half or take whatever percentage we felt that we wanted and give them the rest. Most of the business that we got involved in to collect money was the construction business. Whether it was a supplier of construction material or people that were doing construction themselves, and one company owed another company and one company wasn't paying, and we would get involved. Another way in which organized crime got involved in construction was bid rigging, where a certain contractor would be given a job without going for bid. And that no longer takes place today because the government doesn't allow it. You know, the government monitors what goes on with these construction activities. So bid rigging is something that really was lost today. Another means in present times which to make money was fiber optics. Myself, I was specifically involved with a bunch of guys in our family. We were installing fiber optics for a big company, and we would get subcontractors to do the work for the company that we had. The companies did not have to put it up for bid. They just were given the job to do and told what they should charge and what they should not charge. So that's where the crime comes involved in that. So presently, Cosa Nostra is making money through the old methods and some of new methods like bookmaking, gambling, extortion, labor racketeering, the construction industry, the carting industry, and the garbage industry. And those are always going to go on. Some of the newer ways in which they make money is through restaurant vendors and restaurants and legitimate businesses. They are even inducting members now that are legitimate people that have businesses and have money. So some of the ways in which they lost earning capabilities is like the unions. And the reason being is that the government monitors the unions now. So the government kicked out members of organized crime and companies that were involved with organized crime out of the construction industry, the fish market, and even the garbage industry. Cosa Nostra to me is like an amoeba, and it's always changing shapes and forms, and they're always trying to come up with new schemes and new scams in which to make money. And this will always continue because without scams or scores to make money, money equals power, and without power, there is no more Cosa Nostra.